Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the closing event in Scott Logic's Business Insights from Women in Tech webinar series. This has been an absolute corker of a series, and I want to start by thanking all of the speakers, most of whom are panellists today, for giving us their time and sharing their insights and experiences with us. In case you've missed any of the previous webinars in this series, or to act as a quick reminder, we kicked off the series with Charlie Lester, serial entrepreneur and ultramarathon runner, talking about how to apply an entrepreneurial mindset to problem solving. She was followed by Anna Barsby, managing partner of Tessient and former CIO of Halfords and Morrisons, addressing the issue of why women typically get stuck in middle management roles. Next, Cecile Rousseau, CTO of Ruffer, who I hope is going to join us. We can see her on the screen there now. We are having some tech issues, so bear with us while we try to sort those out. Who's a panelist today, along with Rob Smith, another panelist and client relationships director at Scott Logic, talking us through Ruffer's fascinating digital transformation journey in the most traditional of organisations. Manila McLean, again, another of today's stellar lineup of panellists, CIO of Newcastle Building Society, shared her thoughts on what the post-COVID working world might look like. And Lee Kwan Taylor, Head of Digital Platforms Technology at NatWest, again joining us on today's panel, shared her experience of leading technology teams when you're the only female in the room, a topic that I know we'll be able to explore further in today's webinar. If you missed any of these excellent webinars, I would encourage you to check them out on the Scott Logic YouTube channel. So the only person that this leaves me to introduce you to today is Declan O'Gorman, Head of Enterprise Engineering at NatWest. Declan oversees the bank's engineering practice and talent approaches, seeking new ways to diversify, upskill and excite people about future careers in technology. He also sponsors the RBS Technology Gender Balanced Initiatives and Women in Technology Network. So thank you for joining us today, Declan, and thank you to the rest of our panellists for joining us once again to close out this series. Now, we will endeavour to answer some questions at the end of this webinar, so do pop them into the question box and we'll see how we're doing for time, as there's a lot that we want to cover. So without wasting any more time, let me pass you over to Rob, who will be chairing today's webinar.
Thank you, Claire. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you give me a nod if you can hear me? I had a last-second disaster there with my headset that said battery flat. Couldn't quite believe the timing of that, particularly as it's been on charge all night. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'll get straight into the questions. I believe these are mainly from people who have submitted them based on Claire's previous email. First question. Drawing from Manila and Cecile's webinar, you both refer to how our working practices and policies such as flexi working and remote working will change or may change post-COVID-19. How do you think this will affect our ability to hire and retain female talent? Manila.
I think flexible working is absolutely here to stay. I think over the last 4 months, with having predominantly remote working, flexible working, everybody I've spoken to wants a degree of flexibility going forward that we've not had before. And I think we've used the opportunity to break down the barriers and the misconceptions that a lot of employers have had, and a fear of flexible working. So I do think it's here to stay. I think as a result of that, what we will see is greater access to a wider talent pool in recruitment. I think there's several different areas. There's geographical constraints, physical constraints that potential candidates would have, and also I think just talking about the female agenda, I think and I hope, and I am already seeing that in the recruitment campaign that we are driving at the moment within Newcastle Building Society, that we're starting to see a greater gender balance in the applicants that are coming through. I think though it will be important for employers to make sure that that's apparent, so to talk about it in recruitment and to ensure that ads and role profiles and so on do reflect that fact. Otherwise, you know, there's assumptions that can be made and missed opportunities.
And you mentioned the current recruitment campaign. Have you been explicit in your advertising that remote working is available?
Not in the advertising yet, although we probably do need to change that. But we have been absolutely, when we've been talking to candidates. So I think we talk about flexible working opportunities in all of our ads. But that's always been the case, and actually we've always been a flexible working employer. But there's potentially more opportunity to bring that out given the circumstances. But certainly in any of the candidate interviews or phone calls that we've been having, we do talk about the fact that there is much more flexibility, and that going forward we don't know exactly what the working model will look like yet, but there will be greater opportunity for flexibility, remote working, and striking a better balance to try and support people's needs as well as the business need. Yeah,
and it's interesting that you're already having those conversations now. It implies that change is already embedding itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's different opinions from different colleagues. You know, I've have some colleagues who are desperate to get back into the office, that miss that spark that you get when you're working together, and you know, the camaraderie of being in the same place together. And I think that will drive a new model of how the office is used going forward. But then I've got other colleagues who feel, actually, no, this works really well for me because it gives me greater choice and flexibility. I can work for a couple of hours in the morning, then do the school run, then do a few more hours, do another school run, and then maybe do an hour or so in the evening. So I think I heard somebody use this phrase the other day about, I used to think work was where I went, but now I realise it's what I do. So there's an ability to, I guess, flex and work with work and life much better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Are you able to hear me or not?
Oh, we are. Excellent.
Perfect.
So we have Cecile on, but you can't see her.
Hold on. I just put my webcam back. I'm really sorry.
Excellent. We can hear you perfectly, and you've come in at just the right time, Cecile. So...
I know. That's exactly when I was meant to be talking.
Bang on time there. In fact, funnily enough, I was going to direct the next question to you, so that was perfect timing. When you talked about Ruffer, obviously it's a very traditional organisation, and I think in that context, remote working hasn't been something that you've done in the past. How do you see the COVID situation affecting Ruffer, and will that be a positive thing?
Yeah, so we didn't really have any flexible working arrangement settings in place prior to COVID, and Ruffer being a very sort of face-to-face, high-touch organization, being at home was not seen as the optimal setup. So the culture was very much being in the office, having direct relationship with either clients or colleagues. With COVID, I think we have realized, most people have realized, that we can actually do our job from home. And I think the culture will change probably to a hybrid model going forward, where we're looking at having some people in the office and some people at home on an ongoing basis. So very much a culture change for us.
And do you have evidence that that's already setting root?
Well, certainly the culture within the teams is very different to what it used to be, but people are very happy, think that they can do their job perfectly well from home. And I think once you've demonstrated that, I think it's hard to, not think that you can do that on an ongoing basis. So yes, we're putting in place, I think, a very different workspace strategy to allow that setup to continue going forward.
That's great. And Declan and Lee Kwan, you both work at RBS, which obviously is a bigger beast than both Ruffer and Newcastle Building Society. What has been your experience in this context?
I think it's been a fascinating time, and NatWest has always had a fairly flexible approach to working, a strong desire to give people the tools and the ability to work how they work best. But I think we've seen many years worth of progress in that condensed into probably a matter of weeks really at the height of this crisis, which has been fascinating to see out the other end. As part of that, I think there's probably a couple of things just worth noting. You know, we've taken, I think, some previously sort of sacred elements of our business like trading and customer telephony and found actually we can work those from home. Which has been fascinating to see some of those new roles starting to transform and the impact that we can now have on customer service through some of that. I think it's allowed a lot of people, including myself, to reflect on why we've all spent hours on a train every day, listening to podcasts and rustled up against other people, where actually we can spend that time just wandering up the stairs. I do think there's probably a couple of things we need to be very cautious of as we move forwards, though. Notably, I think it's fairly easy for a lot of us, especially where we've got rooms that we can dedicate to working from home or spaces in our house that we can kind of shut off from the day-to-day life of kids and families. You know, a lot of our graduate, intern, and more junior populations are working from their bedrooms or working from shared flats or from parents' houses. And I think we need to be conscious that the working from home model doesn't necessarily work equitably for everybody. I think, as has been mentioned before, you know, making the flexibility available to people to work where they can, where they need to, where they want to, I think is key, rather than trying to confine everyone to a glorious new normal of working from home, being the new office. And the last thing, and I'd be interested in Nikon's perspective on this as well, actually, you know, what I've experienced personally is a much easier and more equitable and even access to people as we were all working from home. The sort of niches, sidebar conversations, corridor conversations, the I work 3 desks away from that person conversation has become a lot more shared, a lot more easy to access the people that you need, a lot more conscious in the people that people reach out to, which has been great. And as we start to head back into the office, I think trying to work out how we manage that sort of bimodal approach without it tipping back to the sort of, you know, the those in the room and the those on the call that we had before is going to be key.
That is quite a difficult one to balance. I do agree that the transition was incredibly rapid and worked very, very smoothly. But I must admit, I'm one of the camp that do miss a bit of the dynamics of interaction that goes on in an office. And I do think that we need to be careful to balance and have a hybrid model where we do cater for different needs, and also different needs for speed, because sometimes it's actually far quicker to get people together very quickly and talk an issue through in whiteboard sessions. I think that type of session we're still struggling to get working well online, and it's something we need to improve on. We need a digital version of those sorts of sessions. That's interesting.
Have you tried doing that type of session, or have you just given it up as a bad job, really?
We're trying to put things in place to enable us to do them, but we're using the tool we've got at the moment.
And what tool is that?
We're looking at a tool called Mural at the moment.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but we suffer from exactly the same problem, so I'm intrigued at how you get on with that. And Cecile, Manila, have you managed to break that challenge?
So, yeah, interestingly, having the discussions, and there's a practical aspect we're looking at right now, which is how do we make it work? How do we make, you know, everybody in the office able to collaborate with people in the at home, just a very pragmatic and practical level. But yes, when we start thinking about that on a long-term basis, we've had exactly discussions which can we have digital whiteboards that can be used, you know, very effectively to do brainstorms and more collaborative sessions. So working in exactly the same mode as what we do now at home is probably going to be easy, but working in what we used to know is much more problematic. So do you change the way you work, and what impact does it have, or do you try to reproduce what you used to have through, you know, tools, new tools? That's you know, I think the creativity. It's not only in tech. I think it's particularly sensitive in tech, but we have teams such as research having exactly a discussion as well. Yeah. You know, research is based on collaborative sort of ideation and you know, collaborative thinking, and it's not easy to do that when you're remote.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and it was alluded to in what Declan was just saying there, that as we move to what we might call a more mixed mode of working, how does one deal with the proximity bias of the people who are in the office having the side conversations? Do you have any thoughts or experience around that?
I think my personal take on that is, I think we've all, the joys of us all being dumped into this and going through this shared experiences, hopefully we can get back into the office with some shared appreciation and empathy for that situation, and not dissimilar to the broader diversity challenge. I think there's just a need for us to recognise and continue to challenge those biases, conscious and unconscious, that we have around some of those. It'll be fascinating to see how that works. I think the only other thing just worth noting with that, and as I think Amanda maybe alluded to at the beginning, I think there is a huge opportunity through this for us to really use this new way of working to push access for these roles to a far broader range of people as well, and to embed this in a model that works for a much bigger proportion of our staff than I think we have historically been able to do. So roles that we can work within term time, within school drop-off hours, you know, really cranking up that flexibility, I think as an employer gives us some really important benefits that we should be looking to recognise as well.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think one of the things I've recognised is that my team is split across 3 sites, and traditionally I'd have meetings where the bulk would be in London and the rest would be remote, and it's not a very democratic way of working, because the people who are together have the higher level of interaction. I think in the future those sort of meetings I'll do completely remotely, so that it's completely democratized, and I think that becomes then hopefully over a period just part of our culture, and that, you know, people feel able to contribute on the same level. On that front, how important do you think company culture is when it comes to creating an inclusive environment? And again, how do you think that will have shifted over the last few months? Cecile, you talked quite a lot about this during your webinar.
Yeah. I mean, we talked specifically, yes, we talked specifically on that point with regards to sort of female in particular, and how culture is driving effectively more inclusiveness. I think, you know, my experience coming from big South American banks to Ruffer has been quite telling. I think maybe I'm going to generalize, but female can be quite put off by, you know, really harsh culture, competitive culture, sort of cutthroat culture, which you can imagine in larger sort of big banks. Ruffer has a very inclusive and caring culture, which has actually helped us a lot with regards to how attractive we can be to female computer science graduates in particular. Again, it could be a generalization, but in general, I think female respond really well to a culture that is inclusive and caring. And I have found a lot more comments on how important it is for women to feel supported and you know, happy to work in an environment such as that one, versus what I used to know in much more competitive environments. So for me, you know, the culture we're building here, which is much more appreciative of people's individual circumstances, whether it's health, whether it's, you know, caring for dependents, which means that those people need to be working from home, it's actually going to be conducive to I think a much more inclusive environment. And eventually, when we speak to female attractiveness, it will help us going forward.
Couldn't agree more. And your thoughts, Declan, on that in the context of your particular role as head of diversity and inclusion at NatWest? I guess part of your role is about driving the culture. Yeah,
I think specifically in the technology space, I think we often focus in on gender as a bellwether for diversity, and I think that's largely because, frankly, it's one of the easier things for us to measure. It's probably about the only characteristic that a lot of our HR systems carry. And whilst it's never, you know, and there's lots of grey areas around that, but we need to recognise that actually it's not, I think, just women that value working in an inclusive environment. It's quite a lot of the men. It's quite a lot of our other diverse characteristics as well. I think there was a great talk I was in a while ago where somebody mentioned as an individual you can't be diverse. I think that's really the makeup of the group. So we really try to focus in on being inclusive. We've run out training on unconscious bias, on you know, banter and what is appropriate, what isn't. And I think, frankly, some of that's been really quite eye-opening on some of the kind of cultural subtexts beyond the kind of gender side. So, for example, you know, the football, the clubs that you support, whether you support football in Scotland, influences all sorts of other aspects about your personality traits too. I think it's been really interesting, and Lequan did a great talk on, you know, what it's like to kind of be the spearhead of that. You know, like be the first woman in the team, be the first of any sort of minority in the team. And I think what we've tried to do through calling it gender balanced rather than focusing on women in RBS and NatWest is really to recognise that actually this is the whole workforce's responsibility and problem. And one of the reasons that, you know, I'm passionate and stepped up to try and sponsor this is actually, I think, trying to expect women to solve this problem for an organisation of any reasonable size is unreasonable. And actually, one of the things I'm really proud about in NatWest is that we've got a really active society of male allies and a broader awareness really around this topic that I think goes far deeper than some of our peer group in this space.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And Lequan, as a recipient of that culture, what are your thoughts?
So I absolutely think diversity and inclusion is the bedrock of all of it, because without having all those different role models throughout every layer of the organisation, you're never going to crack it, because you're never going to say just bring in managers, but we don't have a pipeline of graduates that are diverse. We need middle tiers that are diverse, but we need to build all of that up. And it feeds into what Celia was saying earlier. You need that environment that encourages people to be diverse and to speak up in order for people to want to work there in the first place. And I think NatWest is really pushing very hard in that direction, which I'm really proud of, actually, because all of the learning that's happening is targeted at everyone. Because I have been in areas in previous jobs where it was very much we're going to do unconscious bias training. I'm going to just tick that, but we don't have a problem here, which was missing the point pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
So targeting at everyone, actually opening eyes, I think is really good, because we're all biased in our own way. Everyone is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the point you just made there about the pipeline, I think, is quite interesting. One of the things we've looked at internally around diversity inclusion at ScotLogic is, in order to be more diverse, one of the ways of doing it is to poach people from our competitors, but that doesn't change society as a whole in any way. And actually, we've looked much earlier in the pipeline and focused on graduates and bringing graduates through and developing them, but also before that as well. So we've invested in a charity, the Altitude Foundation, which is less about diversity but more about social inclusion. But of course, in focusing on social inclusion in schools, one helps to drive diversity, and it's all about building that pipeline. And I know you've mentioned this before, Cecile, and coming back to one of your points about the environment, you mentioned that your daughter and friends are much more interested in going to Bath University than Imperial for exactly that reason.
Yeah, and I think that's the cultural aspect. You know, I think female are interested in a rounded and diverse environment, and Imperial has got, actually, interestingly, I think wrongly, a wrong sort of image of someone who's very male-dominated. Actually went to check the figures on the website, because they're very aware of the image. Actually, they try to dispel the myth, and they're effectively saying they're 7 points ahead of the national average in computer science. 18% of computer science graduates are women, national average, and the 7% above that, 25%, which I admit I was not aware of, and you know, well done to them. But it's still interesting that despite the figures, you know, Imperial has got this image of being very male-dominated and not really attractive for women, and that would be a deterrent potentially to them. So, you know, how do you give that image of being really open and inclusive? And I think the caring aspect is really important. Yeah, we make a big fuss at Ruffer about looking after our employees and being very sort of people focused. And you know, it's not only words, actually actions as well. And I think, you know, women feel very confident and comfortable in that environment. Again, generalization, but I think it does help us a lot.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that chimes with what you were saying earlier, Lequan, about your daughter.
Yes, yes. She, despite being actually very, very talented in STEM subjects, she is very put off computing, because I think in her school it's very male dominated, and it's put her off. So it's all down to the social conditioning, which I'm hoping she'll evaluate it again later because she's doing the right subjects for it. But you know, you can't. Clearly, children have their own mind, and I think as you all know, they will just go their own way.
Yeah.
But I think
it is.
I think they're very conformist. Yeah, they want you to be the same as everybody else. And I think it's interesting at what age do you target effectively the messages around computer science is a great career to have, there's all the opportunities you can have. So 14, 15, I think doesn't work. You know, women just want to be in the sort of girls' club and are not going to be receptive. What we found is, as you know, probably the next topic that you need to address is the students who've done maybe a humanities degree, but somehow realized that maybe they've experienced a little bit of programming during their studies, and actually decide that it's actually a very interesting career. And the masters in computer science, we've had 2 hires recently who've done history degree with a computer science masters, and I think at that age it's actually really, really interesting to address that. You know, having a master's degree is actually an interesting thing in terms of skill set and competencies, etc. And be able to, at that stage, to say, actually, before you go into whatever career you want, can you not reconsider and actually, you know, do a master's in computer science or information technology, and then we can, you know, sort of train on the job afterwards. I just told you before preparing this meeting about a fintech of Silicon Valley company who hire people based on 3 criteria. You know, are you bright? Are you curious and willing to learn? And do you have empathy? And effectively, once you have those 3, it means that, you know, you're bright enough to learn and you have the interest in learning, and you can work with people, and, you know, we can train you on the job. And I think it's a very interesting, you know, recruitment and competencies looked at is a very interesting thing to think of if you're going to, you know, really try to move the needle in terms of your female hire, yeah, and be a little bit more open to consider different backgrounds. You know, once you have those competencies, I think it's a great way to actually encourage your female intake.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Funnily enough, when I started out in IT many years ago, about 30 years ago now, I am old, was at Kodak, and Kodak specifically didn't employ computer graduates because they wanted more rounded individuals. Not that there's anything wrong with computer graduates, but Kodak wanted more rounded individuals. And again, that chimes with a recent survey, I think, where only 3% of girls at high school wanted to go into a career in technology as their first choice. Yeah. How do we change that? How do we change that perception, do you think? Manila, I think you commented on this previously.
Yeah, I think one of the team mentioned this earlier on, but I think it's about getting in at the grassroots. It's in its school kids. The Altitude Foundation that you talked about earlier, we support the foundation at Newcastle Building Society, and one of my team was on a panel discussion last week with some school teachers and heads from the region, talking about how do we encourage more kids into STEM and into technology, but particularly the female and the kind of better gender split. I think still today technology, STEM is seen as geeky, as kind of more a boys subject. Unfortunately, you know, I studied computer science for my undergraduate in 1995, and I was probably one of 10 out of a class of 200 that studied computer science. I don't think it is much better today. You know, it was what's that, about 5%? I think it's maybe, I don't know, 10-15% now. And it's whilst, you know, within my department, I think we have around 25% female, but for the deep tech disciplines, it's much less. And I think the only way that we're not going to change that overnight. We need to start at grassroots, and that's at school, and encouraging more. And you know, there's tons of opportunities, tons of groups that are really trying to encourage that. And I think, for me, it'll be one of the action points, which is passionate for all of us on this talk, but it is to support at school level. And it's not about parachuting in and delivering a presentation once every 6 months. It's about that sustainable support. We've developed a great apprenticeship programme, and we work with Prince's Trust, and a big focus for us is about getting that diversity balance right. But it's going to take time. But I hope that my daughter, who's 3, when if she decides to go into tech, I hope that by the time she's my age, that it's not a subject anymore that we talk about, this need for a better gender balance. I hope that it's just the way that the way that things are.
I think that's fascinating. You mentioned the Prince's Trust. I guess from my perspective, I'd always seen that as something that was pre-work and about building capability and getting out and building your own competencies. I hadn't realized it was potentially a route to an apprenticeship. How does that work with NBS?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've I think we have around there's maybe 3 or 4 within the department, but every year we support the Prince's Trust, and we'll bring participants of the Prince's Trust through the organisation to help to I guess help to educate and help everyone understand what the world of work is like, and how to look for opportunities, and how to grasp them when you see them. And we will offer placements as well, to help to take individuals through the apprenticeship programme and to continue their studies. And many of them will become a colleague permanently with the Building Society. And I mean, the feedback that we get from the Prince's Trust is incredibly powerful for the impact that it has on those individuals.
That sounds great. Really good. And just earlier, Cecile was mentioning recruitment based on competencies, so that you weren't just going and picking up pre-trained IT staff. Declan, I think you mentioned previously that NatWest takes a similar view in terms of competency-based recruitment.
That's right. So I think, just to go back to what Manila was saying, but we've pushed this topic fairly hard over the last few years. I think we're at about 20% for our software engineering cohort, and about 30% overall across technology in terms of gender balance. And based on a market average that's well below that, I think to your point at the outset, Rob, we're in kind of danger of just poaching each other's staff if we don't do something to broaden the talent pipeline, both at the junior levels, people go through school, but also actually people who fancy a career change later in life.
Yeah.
I think there is a bit of a challenge reflecting on this myself over the last period, that we tend to describe technology roles as fairly binary, fairly logical sort of exercises. And if you're not interested in STEM, then you won't be interested in tech. Actually, I think technology is one of the most creative roles out there, frankly. The degree of problem solving, the degree to which you can impact millions of people's lives with a single line of code is really quite a powerful place to be. I think really quite an empowering place to be as well for a lot of people coming through those kind of junior pipelines. And I think we don't do enough sometimes to talk about the impact and purpose of technology beyond the kind of ones and zeros of it, if you like. The only other thing in terms of the kind of junior talent piece, we've run a lot of code clubs with school members, and we're part of the STEM Ambassadors Network. We support Tech She Can, we're a signatory of the Tech Talent Charter, etc. And one of the things we see very clearly as we go through those code clubs, and I've seen as I've done them as well, is you have a very worrying split of boys and girls on what they want to try and solve for in that. The girls tend to be the ones, so we do robot wars where people design and build their own car, and then they go and fight them and try and pop each other's balloons at the end, which is usually a complete riot. But the girls are the ones who tend to be the ones decorating the cars by default, and the boys are the ones drawn towards the coding. And actually, it's quite interesting to consciously break that mindset with them and kind of force them to swap those roles over. But it does show the power of that kind of social convention. We don't challenge it both as parents, employers, friends, family, etc.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned it when we spoke before that you also run code clubs with exco members.
Yeah, so Ross McEwen, actually, when he was in charge of the bank, took part in one of our code clubs, which I think was an eye-opening experience for him. But I think it's a really powerful thing to do, and one of the great things, actually, just watching our own internal kind of Facebook feeds over the last few months has been we've started to expose some Python programming to basically anyone in NatWest who wants to consume it. And actually, it's been massively oversubscribed and very, very well attended. And seeing lots of people in the business who have wanted to understand how this world works, lots of people looking at how they can use it to get into the world of data science or computer programming. Actually, I think there's lots of latent demand out there. And to your original question around the competencies, you know, we look at things like, are you an improver, innovator? Are you change ready? You know, are you data driven? Really, rather than do you have this specific experience item on your CV? Because I think largely, and especially at the more junior levels, you know, as has been mentioned, those skills are trainable, teachable, and the desire and ability to be inquisitive and driven around this is really the key factor.
I think it's fascinating. I think encouraging people to be inquisitive and understand what technology gives you. And I think, so I can't remember who just said this, but of course, one of the key things is that IT is not what it used to be. It's a lot more creative than when we all started out, when we were writing code that had no visibility and was just crunching large numbers and was much more of a scientific subject than it is today. It's so much more about human interaction. It is so much more creative and therefore has a much broader appeal. And actually, it has a lot more disciplines within it that promote more diversity because of that interest level. You mentioned Python. You've also had that experience, Cecile, of training people in Python through the business.
Yeah, and I completely rejoin what Dick's saying. I think we're moving away now from, you know, technology being a sort of nerdy subject, only sort of you know, interesting for some people, to really a life skill. That's what I think technology becomes now. It's a life skill. It's a language. It's a foreign language. You know, it's got syntax. It's got different sort of vocabulary, and you just need, if you were to present that as being, you know, an additional skill set that everybody really should gain at school and after, whether you're in the business or in technology, I think it's a very different sort of value proposition for people. So you could present it as, you know, a way to really understand people's job and automate and improve people's lives at work, yeah, which is a very sort of worthy sort of purpose. But, you know, what we've tried to do is really to be more of a, you know, to promote a bit of self-service within Ruffer. A lot of young grads that come into business have had a level of exposure to programming, understand, you know, the opportunities that coding gives them, and actually wants to benefit from that. So we've done a couple of things. One is Python training, exactly the same way as Declan says, so that they can do a little bit of, you know, replace Excel. What we're saying is, you know, Python is the new Excel. You know how to, you know, do some, you know, Excel sort of macros or VBAs. Now you learn Python, and it gives you a much, you know, better sort of tool set to do what you want. And then we try to do a lot of tech talks as well to demystify what we do in technology, to explain what we do, because we found, you know, it's a little bit too much of a black box, and there's a lot of value in actually educating and collaborating with your business stakeholders who need to understand, you know, the steps and the processes that you follow and what really we do in technology. So it's been really interesting, a really interesting sort of theme, and a lot of interest, I think, on the business side. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And Lee Kwan, and in your webinar, which was absolutely brilliant, thank you. You talked about the challenge of being the only female in the room. Considering that only 5% of leadership positions in technology are held by women, what can we do to remove the barriers?
So this sort of circles back to the subject of diversity and inclusion, because where you have a very large imbalance in the normal ratios that we see, then that's where unconscious bias really thrives, and you get very very directional pulls in what, you know, in one area, and you end up with an environment which doesn't encourage people to speak up, to speak their mind, to be their own authentic leader. And I think we do need to push that. That's how we will remove the barriers, to make sure we bring more women in, have more balance across all tiers, like I said before. And we can only really do that if we have, you know, organisations that have really clear and transparent recruitment processes based on competencies, and where we don't have a bias in the actual recruitment process in the first place. In terms of leading technology teams, I think it's technologists, as Declan says, they're quite a different breed. He's grinning there. So someone did describe it as herding cats, and it's something that's always stuck with me throughout my career, because most technologists are very passionate about what they do. They will get on a soapbox and they will really fight their corner. So understanding how technologists think and work, understanding the base, all the concepts, keeping up to date, which is the subject of evergreening your knowledge, which is difficult in the current environment because it's moving so quickly. All of that helped you do your job better, because no one needs to explain a problem to you, because you get it. And I think that buys the that sort of gets the support and the respect of your team, which is really important. And then you need to work to bring more women in across that team and to get that balance. And the tone comes from the top. And so long as the leadership of your organisation is really bought in to addressing this, that really helps. And I think that's made a big difference in the last 5-6 years at NatWest.
And as women who've risen to the top, and probably being the only female in the room at times, do you have any tips, Manila, Cecile?
You know, for many years I wasn't even aware that I was the only female in the room, and if I'm honest, I think it's only been in the last maybe 6 or 7 years where I think the topic has been discussed, that I actually became aware of it and realised, oh yeah, so I am. You know, when I talked about, you know, what, 25 years ago when I studied computer science, I didn't even notice at the time. And it was the other night I was actually thinking about every single lecturer and professor in my computer science department was a man. It was a hybrid degree I'd done for my undergraduate with management science, which is still a fairly technical subject. There's a lot of data science and visual interactive simulation and so on. But that department was predominantly female in terms of the professors and lecturers, interestingly. But I think because, you know, when I was growing up, I was always going to go into technology. You know, I was been interested in technology since I was, you know, a Commodore 64 when I was 5 for Christmas, and you know that was the start of it. It was never even really crossed my mind that I was the only female in the room for many years. But I do think it is important to be aware of it now, because I think Lee Kwan mentioned earlier about the importance of role models, and unless you have those role models in place, then it's hard to see the potential for yourself, and you know, in your, because you kind of you almost become what you can see in many instances. You know, others kind of break through that, but I think role models are important, but it's also important to have the right person in the job. You know, I talked earlier about the split that we have in our function, and we have, you know, a lot of females in the department, but in those deep tech roles, it tends to be more predominantly male, and we're recruiting heavily at the moment. And for those tech roles that are more around architecture, security, and so on, it's much more male dominated, whereas those that are you know, in more of the wider digital subjects like user experience and user research and so on, there seems to be more of a balance. But I think it is important to have awareness and the focus of it, to have diversity in your recruitment teams, and think about how your ads and your role profiles are presented. we use some software that we run all of our ads and job profiles through to. It's a bit scientific, but it will kind of spit out how gender neutral or male or female are your job specs. And interestingly, one of the role specs that I wrote recently with one of my female colleagues, it came out predominantly female, whereas the ones that the guys had written were predominantly male. And I mean, there's words that the software will tell you, you know, these are more female words or more male words, but awareness is the first thing, and having it as a focus.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've never thought about male and female ways of writing job specs. I'm now going to find the software and check the ones I've written in the past. That sounds a fascinating thing to do this afternoon.
I know,
Cecile,
I want to know what the words are.
sorry, say that again, Lee.
I want to know what those key words are. That's
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any clues as to a keyword then, Manila?
Yeah, I mean, some of them actually, and you know, Lee Kwan and Cecile may disagree with this because I felt a bit surprised by it, but the words like leadership, structure, focus, delivery were male words according to the software, whereas the female words were collaboration, empathy, creativity, customer.
Does that imply an unconscious bias in the software, I wonder?
Well,
agree.
you know, who's coding the algorithm? You know, if it is, you know, mainly male dominated that are developing algorithms and AI and so on, specifically in that example, then that creates gender bias.
I know.
Yeah.
I think they've got some gender stereotyping going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cecile?
So I think the interesting part of your question is how do we get women to, you know, rise to the top? I thought it's a bit of an image here. So yes, one aspect is to get them in, but the interesting thing is how do you keep them and how do you coach them and nurture them to actually move up? Yeah, I think looking on your webinar, you talked about, you know, the kind of dead, you know, period of the 30s when women maybe very technical, just don't, you know, stick to or don't have the resilience, I guess. Resilience is a bit harsh, but you know, tend to kind of give up if you want and focus on raising a family, and it's much harder to come back afterwards. So how do we do that? You know, I think as leaders, I think we need to really promote a culture that is flexible and supportive. I think support for women is really important. Yeah, feeling supported in your role makes such a difference for women in particular, probably for men too. We're talking about women here, and allowing the flexibility to be able at a period of time in your life to have, you know, balance of life between sort of your family life and your work life. And we found in, you know, areas or in environments that are not very supportive, women tend to leave much quicker just because they don't even, you know, want to fight. Yeah, it's sort of lost cause already. Let's not even fight. Let's just go outside. So it's really the culture and environment is really important to allow women to feel like they're given permission to have more balance of life for a bit of time, and then to go back to, you know, maybe more aggressive sort of challenge afterwards. So I think as leaders, that's what we really want to promote. The other aspect is really to make sure that some of the other competencies are promoted. It's not just about being super techy. It's about, you know, the collaboration, the creativeness, the business understanding needs to be valued as well. Yeah, and I've been in organizations where, you know, BAs and GMs were not really valued, only software developers. You know, it's fine, but you're creating an environment that is not then conducive to potentially promoting some women who have got different skill sets, and I think it needs to be valued for that. And I think as people now, you know, just, you know, more the managers, leaders, as people, you know, how do you stick, you know, with all the hard combination of life and work, and how do you push yourself to be promoted? I I think there's a resilience aspect, which I think, Linky, you talked about before. There's a self-confidence suddenly to say, I can achieve that. And obviously having models is, a way to give you self-confidence. It's achievable and you can do it as well. I think there's a very important part for me as well, which is to really get feedback from others. The key question the tips I would give is to go to someone who's not necessarily a supporter of yours and to ask the question, what's holding me back? I want to be promoted, and you have to be really assertive on that. I want to be promoted. What is holding me back? And if the person is, honest and cares enough about you, they will give you the answers. What is holding you back? And as an example, I did ask that to somebody I really trusted and was a great male role model for me. And he said, well, the problem with you, Cecile, is that you look too busy. You're always busy. Yes, I'm always busy. I love being busy. I love doing everything. And we don't give you opportunities because you're so busy. And I just fell off my chair. Well, what do you mean? I'm great. I'm delivering. I'm just, working day and night to do that. What do you mean? And yes, it's holding me back because people don't give opportunities to people who look busy. You just try to, preserve them a little bit, especially if they're female and they have kids, and you not give them the hard opportunities that are really going to make a difference to be promoted. So, that was my lessons learned, I guess. But just going to somebody that you trust and maybe not super supportive of you and say, what's holding you back? Is really interesting question. I would suggest people ask that. They will be surprised of the answers they get because they're not always aware of, how people perceive you. And you're responsible for your image, and you're responsible for understanding what you need to change to get up, in the ladder. And then, key thing is obviously having objectives. Yeah, being able to say, I want that promotion, and I'm, willing to work on changing the perception people have of me, and changing obviously the way I behave or act is really important. So it's a bit of a campaign. Yeah, you just need to put yourself the objectives and have a very strong discipline around how you do them. It'd be interesting to see what other things that other people are thinking.
Perfect, thank you. I'm very conscious of time, so I'd like to skip to what would be our final question and then potentially take one from the audience. So quickly round everyone. Thank you very much for contributing today. I found it fascinating. What should people take away from today, and what can people do tomorrow? And I will go around in alphabetical order. So Manila, would you like to start on that one?
Yeah, I think like I was saying earlier, so supporting at grassroots, that's really important to help with the female agenda, and I guess that's the topic of our conversation today. And I think for young girls and women who may be watching the webinar and who may be wanting to progress their career in tech, the things I would say to them are continue to be curious, never stop learning. Have fun in your career because you're going to be in it for a long time. You need to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, there's tons of other things that you can be doing. As you get into more senior leadership positions, build strong teams around you. I'm surrounded by super intelligent people who are experts in their own fields. It's important to have the right team around you. Have multiple mentors for lots of different aspects. Make sure you've got sponsors, people that are willing to put their neck out and talk positively about you when you're not in the room. And I think the final thing is, it's your career. Manage it. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Nobody else is going to give you everything that you want. You need to create those opportunities and drive it forward yourself.
I think that's a perfect description for anyone entering their career now. That was excellent. Thank you. Declan?
I think there's a couple of things to look at. I'll start out, as I said before, with the slide pattern. I'm biased in this, obviously, as I think we all are on this call, frankly. But I think technology is an incredibly exciting, creative, innovative, experimental field that we tend not really to do a very good job of selling as technologists. We tend to get home and describe it as pretty boring to our families, I think. So I think there's probably, depending on whether you're joining this call as an employer, a prospective employee, or just an individual interested in the topic. I think as an employer, understand your workforce. The data's there in front of you. Remove the cloak. And I think can't remember whether it was Cecile or Manila that mentioned, once you can see that you're the only person in the room, or that you're sitting in a room with only one female in it, it's kind of hard to unsee that fact again. And it becomes kind of painfully obvious every time that you're in conversation from that point forwards that you need to do something to fix it. So recognise the challenges, take small steps, commit to 50% in your grad intake, make sure that you're pushing for females in your shortlisted candidates when you're doing new roles, make sure that your interview panels include a diverse set of interviewers. As an individual on this call, as a parent, a carer, a friend of people, just be positive about technology as a role. I think it's incredibly important that we try and consciously break those stereotypes that, as we've talked about, probably are still persisting from the 1980s, when that was the role of technology, in a dark room in the basement. And as an individual, I think Manila has summed up perfectly, but be confident, get out there. This is your career to drive. And actually, I think that in a lot of cases, irrespective of whether you're a woman or a man, actually I think people are doing a far better job than they often give themselves credit for. So go out there with a bit of awareness of that, really.
Sorry, I was on mute for a second. Hoovering keeps going on in the background. And Lee Kwan?
Right, so I don't want to go over any of the points before, but for me, it's very much about being very aware of what's going on around you, and to create an environment in your own teams where that diversity can thrive, where you're actively looking to bring people in. I'm particularly looking to look at widening the pipe, certainly from graduate apprentice level, and also returnships, which I don't think we do enough. And looking at what we can do in that space is definitely somewhere where we can all, male or female, look to just get more talent in. That's going to do us all good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And finally, Cecile.
Yeah, there's summary. I think two things for me. One, as manager, colleague, mentor, and support women to give self-confidence and to help them build the skill set and the confidence that they need. And then as an employee is really seek and take opportunities. I think trying out new things, learning and getting to know other people and other part of the business is going to be key for making you a rounded person that understand holistically not only tech but the business as well.
Perfect, thank you. Well, we've come to a natural close, bang on time, so thank you very much. I can't thank you all more for contributing today and also on the previous webinars. It's been a great series. It's been something that it's been very different for Scott Logic to do. Normally we just do super techie things, so it's been great to be involved in this. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you everyone who's joined us today. If you want to watch any of the previous webinars, if you missed them, or if you want to watch this again, it is available via the Scott Logic YouTube channel, which you can find from our website. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day.